let's begin from here, and we'll say daven that the fruits of our learning should help to bring home the hostages and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents, and bring an end to this war.
Amen.
And with that, we will begin in earnest. So now we're at the beginning of Daf Pei Bet Amud Aleph. So we're moving into a new Mishnah, a new Sugya. Mishnah says, Hatinokot, Ein ma'aninotan biyom haKippurim, aval mechanchin lifnei shana v'lifnei shnatayim, bishvil shehiyu regilim b'mitzvot. So tinokot ein ma'aninotan. So we have a few questions here. First question should be, what are tinokot? What do we think tinokot are?
Usually it's the children in the Talmud.
So it's children, but we need a halachic definition because we're learning halakha. So this is going to be our first question when the Mishnah says it's tinokot. So what can we say tinokot aren't?
Adults over bar mitzvah.
So presumably it would exclude anyone who's over bar bat mitzvah. So we'll see how that works out. And then it says ein ma'aninotan b'yom haKippurim. So what does ein ma'aninotan mean?
They don't have to fast.
That what?
They don't have to fast.
They don't have to fast. So ein ma'aninotan, I could understand that possibly in two ways. So one is, maybe it means, like Paul says, that they don't have to fast. But what's a more literal way of understanding it? Ein ma'aninotan. The way Paul puts it, it's reshut. In other words, if they, they could fast. But what does ein ma'aninotan mean?
Maybe to force them to fast.
It means or the other way. Ein ma'aninotan would mean we don't let them fast. So, in other words, see, notice the way the halakha is worded. It's worded not from the point of view of the tinok. In other words, we don't say that a tinok chayav, a tinok patur. It's the ein ma'aninotan. Who would be ma'aneh or not ma'aneh? Who's that referring to?
The parents.
The parents, right? So this is different than other halachot that we've learned, because here again the chiyuv, or whether or not there's a chiyuv here, the chiyuv is going to be on the parent and not on the child. The children are all patur. Children don't have any mitzvot until they come of age. So hatinokot ein ma'aninotan would mean that we don't let them fast. We don't make them fast, meaning we don't let them fast. Now Rashi says the way Paul said, ein ma'aninotan, ein chayavin limnoa mehen ma'achal. We are not obliged to prevent food from them. We don't have to prevent them from eating. In other words, so Rashi's saying we don't it doesn't say that we actively feed them. And it doesn't say we don't let them fast. Rashi says it means that we don't have to prevent them from eating. We don't have to prevent them from getting food. It's a passive understanding.
But if it's a little child, you have to prepare for the food in advance, but you have to feed it. It's a baby or a small child. You have to feed them.
Right. So we also see in the
Which is
Hemshech,
active.
right, actively, of course, you have to feed the younger child. So we already have a hint of this from the rest of the Mishnah, because then it says, "Aval mechanchinotan lifnei shana v'lifnei shnatayim." We educate them before a year and before 2 years. So what, right? Bishvil shiyu regilim b'mitzvot, so that they're accustomed to mitzvot. So when it says "Aval mechanchinotan lifnei shana v'lifnei shnatayim," so what's lifnei shana v'lifnei shnatayim? Before 1 year, before 2 years, before 1 or 2 years before what?
Before bar mitzvah.
So presumably it's right before they would have their own chiyuv, before their bar bat mitzvah. So 1 year or 2 years before they are b'nei mitzvah, mechanchinotam, we educate them. So what it indicates to you is that the Mishnah here is talking mainly about older children. Seems to be mainly talking about older children. Certainly it includes older children. And in terms of Paul's point that, a younger child, certainly an infant, it wouldn't be just, we would be obliged to make sure that they eat. We'll see this a little bit later in Halakha. We'll look at the Rambam and the Rif disagree with Rashi about this, and they hold that we don't let a child complete the fast but we'll see. We have to see more in the Gemara about that. Okay, so mechanchinotam. So what would be the chinuch that you would give a child who's not obliged to fast, and that we don't hold food back from? But what would be the chinuch? How do you educate them?
Maybe by delaying feeding them for a few hours.
Okay, so very good. So that's what we're going to see as we continue. So I'm gonna leave the rest of Rashi here now for the moment. We'll come back to Rashi later. Let's look in the Gemara. Gemara asks another question that we didn't ask, right? It says, Hashta bifnei shtayim mechanchin lahu, bifnei shana mebayim. Now we see that we're mechanchin otam, that we educate them 2 years prior to their becoming b'nei mitzvah. B'nei shana mebayim, do I need to say 1 year? What's the Gemara asking here?
Why does it give 2 increments of time?
Well, let's be more precise. It's not just what you do.
Well, I mean, if we start educating them 2 years before, why does it also say 1 year?
So exact. So in other words, if I know if the Mishnah tells me that I'm going to do chinuch 2 years prior, so that implies I'm also going to do chinuch 1 year prior. So why do I need to mention why do I need to mention the 1 year?
I mean, I'm gonna say,
Well,
never mind,
okay,
okay.
you want to answer for the Gemara? Go ahead. What do you want to? What do you want to
No,
say?
I'm not gonna answer the Gemara. I stopped myself in time.
Amar Rav Chisda lo kasha. Rav Chisda says it's not a problem. Ha b'chole, ha b'bari. This one's talking about sickly child. This is a healthy child. So which is which? Which thing in the Mishnah is talking about a sickly child and which is talking about a healthy child?
The 1 year would be relevant to the sick child, and the 2 years for the child that's healthy.
Very good. So the chiddush of the Mishnah is that we're going to see based on the particular child. So if the child is sickly, what does it mean? B'choleh? Rashi says, "Kachush v'tashush koach." He's weak and he's of weak strength. So it's a child that apparently would not be able to suffer fasting, or maybe if they do fast, that would make them dangerously ill. So for that, the Mishnah says that's why it starts off with Lifnei Shana, saying if the child isn't that healthy, so we start to do chinuch a year before. In other words, the Yom Kippur prior to them being b'nei mitzvah. But if they're healthy, you start 2 years before. So now we're going to get into more detail. Amar Rav Huna ben Shmone uven Teisha v'chanchin oto l'sha'ot ben Eser uven Achadesrei mashlimim midrabanan ben Shtem Esrei mashlimin midioraita bitinoket. So Rav Huna says, someone who is 8 or 9, we educate them by hours. Someone who is 10 or 11, they complete midirabanan, right? According to the din dirabanan. And someone who's 12, mashlimin midioraita, they have to complete midioraita bitinoket, if it's a female. So let's break this down. So ben Shmona ben Teisha, someone who is 8 or 9. So here also, what's our question about Rav Huna when he says someone who's 8 or 9?
It's the same issue as before. Why say 9 if the person is going to start fasting at 8?
Right. So then what will be our answer? What's the assumed answer?
Whether the child is healthy or sickly.
Right. So Rav Huna, we could say, is building on what we know. So if the child is a healthy child, beginning when they're 8, and if they're not as healthy, beginning when they're 9, we educate them by hours. So what would it mean by hours?
Presumably that there's some restriction imposed on their eating for some limited increments of time,
Okay, so
as opposed to all of Yom Kippur.
Okay, so we already have this question in our head about whether or not we don't allow them to fast or we allow them to fast, but either way, we understand the Mishnah says ein ma'anin. Ein ma'aninotan b'yom kippurim, but mechanchinotan. So we understand Rav Huna is coming now to explain what is this chinuch. If ein ma'aninotan, so if I'd stop there, I would just say, I could say that it means that children are simply not, we don't let children fast on Yom Kippur. But the Mishnah does say mechanchinotan. We educate them. So now he says, we educate them, meaning mechanchinotan oto l'sha'ot. So that means that what? That we're going to withhold food from them for, by the hour, as it were. So let's say if they're accustomed to eating at 8 in the morning, then we'll say, we'll feed them at 9 in the morning or 10 in the morning. And there also, it doesn't say how many sha'ot, but that's, the implication is you feed them later. And then if they're 10 or 11, mashlimin midrabanan, then they complete the fast midrabanan. In other words, there's no mitzvah d'oraita because they're not yet b'nei mitzvah. But mishum chinuch, then midrabanan, we say they should complete the fast. And there also will say 10 or 11, presumably depending on the health of the child. That if they're healthy enough that they'll complete the fast when they're 10. If they're 11, when they're 11, they should complete the fast in any event, midrabanan. And if it's a girl, when she's 12, she has to finish the fast midioraita. Okay, so far so good. Rav Nachman Amar, so that was Rav Huna. Rav Nachman Amar, ben Tesha, ben Eser, v'chanchinotan l'sha'ot, ben Achadesrei, ben Shtemesrei. Oh wait, before we go on. So the last line of Rav Huna is betinoket, right? It's about a girl. So our question is going to be, what does that refer to? Betinoket. The last line was ben shtemesrei mashlimim midioraita betinoket. I will point out that it's a little confusing because the verbs here are not just the verbs, the reference are male, right? Ben shmona ben tesha v'chanchin oto would refer to a male, or well, stam, it refers to a male. But we end off by saying betinoket. So what is the tinoket refer to? In other words, when I say, does it refer to someone who's 12? In other words, does it refer only to the last thing in this ma'amar? Or does it refer to everything? In other words, that with the tinoket, if she's healthy, I start from the time she's 8. But the reason that seems incongruous is because it says ben shmona, ben tesha. It doesn't say bat shmona or bat tesha. You see what I'm asking? Okay, so it's not immediately clear.
Today it would be unacceptable to write this way.
Yes, it would be unacceptable to write this way. But, grammar changes with time. No, I mean, that's a whole side issue, but it's very interesting. Sometimes even when you're learning Tanakh, and you might see a construct that seems wrong, but it's Tanakh. That's where we get it, that's the basis. Anyway, that's a whole separate discussion. But here, so I might nonetheless come to the conclusion that Rav Huna's entire Ma'amar is talking about a Tinoket. And we'll make an argument for that in a moment, despite the fact that it says Ben, and Oto, despite that maybe the whole thing is talking about a Tinoket. Because now I have Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman Amar, Ben Tesha, Ben Eser, Mechanchin Otan L'Sha'ot. He at least puts it in the plural. Someone who's 9 or someone who's 10, we educate them according to hours. Ben 11, Ben 12, Mashlimin Midrabanan. When they're 11 or 12, they have to finish the fast Midrabanan. Ben 13, Mashlimin Midioraita Bitinok. Okay, so I see from Rav Nachman, it's a parallel set of halachot, right? So it's parallel to Rav Huna. And then the simplest thing for me to say is that they're not arguing, but rather Rav Huna is telling us the din for tinoket, and Rav Nachman is telling us the din for tinok. And so if that's true, then that would answer a question. But tinoket, it refers to the whole thing here. And that's why, since the tinoket comes of age a year earlier than the tinok, so we start earlier. We start from the time she's 8. So when she's 8, we start feeding her later than usual. And from this, we already have the implication about children who are younger than 8. Presumably, we don't do anything different for them. Back to Paul's point, right? Children, let's say up to the age of 8, you would feed them normally based on this. You feed them however you normally feed them, at whatever time you normally feed them. If it's a girl, once she's 8, if she's healthy, you're going to start to feed her later. If she's not as healthy, wait till she's 9. And in any event, once she's 10, if she's healthy, or 11, if she's not as healthy, she has to complete the fast. So if she's healthy, she's going to fast when she's 10. She's going to complete the fast when she is 10, 11, and then when she's 12, midioraita, she has to complete the fast. And then for the boy, it's going to be the same thing, but everything will be a year later, right?
What is the source of the fact that the boys are chayavim from age 13 and the girls from age 12? Where does this come from?
So it's interesting that you ask. I actually, when I was preparing this earlier in the week, I was trying to track down exactly, the earliest source that talks about this. And this issue comes up. It comes up elsewhere, right? It comes up in other Mishnayot. The main source is really, it's a tradition. In other words, we don't learn it out from Psukim. And it was a recognition that girls mature earlier than boys. But in terms of other sources, I'm going to have to leave it. I set aside a couple. There's some Mishnayot in Tzubot, and I think in Yivamot, and some other places. But I am going to leave it aside. This question is relevant in other contexts as well.
Is there something in the Tanakh somewhere?
That's what I mean. Not explicitly, but for example, in Torah, for example, we have the question of the Na'ara Murasa. So what's a Na'ara? So there has to be a halachic definition of a Na'ara. And so there are diyunim about this. There are already sources based on understanding things in Tanakh. I need to know when somebody comes of age and for what purpose. So let's say when I talk about Na'ara, Chazal had these. Chazal talk about the category of the Na'ara, who was a girl who's 12 years in a day, and then also a Bogeret. And that's somebody who's 12 and a half in a day. And they have different dinim based that have to do with Inyanei Ketubah and Inyanei, like if they're, God forbid, raped or seduced. And at what point, for example, most of these halachot actually they're about girls, because it's someone who is not yet independent, is not considered to be an adult for halachic purpose. The father can marry off the daughter before she comes of age. Midioraita, right? The father can betroth and actually marry his daughter, and she has no say because she's a minor. He can't do that for the son, only for the daughter. And midirabanan, if there isn't a father, then the mother or an older brother can marry her off. And the difference being that when she comes of age, when she becomes a na'ara, she can reject the marriage at that time because the marriage is only midirabanan. That's called miyun. That's, if you're familiar, I don't know if you're familiar with these halachot. There was a terrible, this is a real digression, but there was a terrible incident a number of years ago where father married off his daughter before he, like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Some guy, in order to take revenge, who had like a bitter divorce, in order to take revenge on his ex-wife and their daughter, he took it out on the daughter. And he married her off to someone and didn't tell who it was. But halachically, she was married, because he could marry without her consent and even without her presence. So that was a whole deal. Anyway, so maybe I shouldn't have digressed onto that. In any event, the basic answer though is going to be that there's a Masorah that a girl comes of age for certain halachic purposes when she's 12 in a day, and for a boy it's when he's 13 in a day. In other words, that a girl has completed 12 whole years and she's now in her 13th year. And for the boy, it's when he's completed 13 years and he begins his 14th year. And it could be the next week we'll do a little bit more about that. But it's a very good question. And that's all I'm going to say about it for right now. Okay, so that's what we have from Rav Nachman. So we have Rav Huna and we have Rav Nachman, and they presumably are laying out for us this Ma'arechet HaChinuch, right? This is the system for educating their children for fasting on Yom Kippur. So if it's a girl, depending on whether she's healthy or not as healthy, she'll start at 8 or 9. When she's 10 or 11, she'll finish the fast midirabanan, meaning because midirabanan, meaning that the Rabbanan said that we should educate our children in mitzvot, and so we have them do certain mitzvot even before they're chayav. And this is one of these instances. And then once she's 12, then she has to complete the fast meteorite. For the boy, he starts when he's 9 or 10. When he's 11 or 12, depending on how healthy he is, he has to finish the fast midirabanan. And when he's 13, he has to finish the fast meteorite. Then we have Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Hashlama de Rabbanan leka. He says there isn't completion midirabanan. Ben Eser, Ben Achadesrei, Mechankin oto l'sha'ot. Ben Shtenesrei, Mashlimin midioraita. So what's Rabbi Yochanan saying? He says, Hashlama de Rabbanan leka. There is no Hashlama de Rabbanan. There is no completing midu Rabbanan. So what does he mean by that?
Maybe it means that there's no difference between fast for a few hours and the rabbinic fast.
Say that a little. Explain that a little bit more. What do you mean? In other words, so what does he say? He says Hashlama de Rabbanan leka. There is no Hashlama midu Rabbanan. And so what is there? So he says when the child is 11 or 12, we educate him according to hours. So we know what that means. So it means that when he's 11 or 12, I'm sorry, when he's 10, I said Ben Esser, Ben Achadesrei. If he's 10 or 11, then we withhold food from him for hours, right? Depending on how healthy he is and what he's accustomed to. We feed him later than usual when he's 10 or 11. And then when he's 12, he has to finish the fast dioraita. So what does it mean? According to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no such thing as finishing the fast midurabanan. There is no mitzvah midurabanan to finish the fast. Then our other question is, who is he talking about? Is he talking about both boys and girls, or just
Seems to be a girl, but maybe he doesn't. According to him, the boys are also, don't know, chayavim starting age 12. I don't know. That's strange.
Right.
I don't think so.
No, very good. We don't know. It's not so clear from Rabbi Yochanan. Because he doesn't say if it's a girl, then this, and if it's a boy, then this. So I could look at Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, and I could say, even though they made their statements independently, right? They made separate statements, but Rav Huna is explicit that he's talking about tinoket. Rav Nachman is explicit that he's talking about tinok, and Rabbi Yochanan's not explicit. So it could be for both boys and girls. In which case, it would imply that Rabbi Yochanan would hold that boys become chayav midioraita from the time that they're 12. From the time that they're actually 12 years, like they've completed 12 whole years, which means that they're now 13, but that would also be the same thing for the girl. Right? So we don't know. It's a little bit strange. At this point, it's a little bit hard to say. So we're going to go on. We're going to continue reading, and we'll see how the Gemara what the Gemara does with this. So the Gemara says, Tanan, we learn in the Mishnah, Hatinokot ein maninotam biyom kippurim, but b'machanchinotam lifnei shana, lifnei shatayim, lifnei shtayim. The gears of our mission is shatayim, but between 1 or 2 years. I'm not maybe. Shana, yeah, our mission says shatayim.
It's a repetition.
It's our Mishnah. It's our Mishnah. So now the Gemara is bringing our Mishnah, and presumably it's going to now go back and say, let's look at the Mishnah, and we're going to line up the different opinions against our Mishnah and see which ones work out better. So it says, Bishlam el Rav Huna v'Rav Nachman lifnei shana lifnei shtayim lifnei shana l'divrei lifnei shtayim l'divrei Elo Rabbi Yochanan kasha. Amar lach Rabbi Yochanan, my shana u'shtayim, samuch l'firkan. So Gemara says, Mishnah goes well according to Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, because the Mishnah says, "V'chanchinotan lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim." So Bishlam or Rav Huna Rav Nachman lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim. That part of the Mishnah says lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim. That goes well, because then I'll understand lifnei. What does it mean when the Mishnah says lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim? Lifnei shana l'divrei lifnei shtayim l'divrei. That mid'Rabbanan l'divrei would mean according to their words, according to the rabbi's words. According to the rabbis, the chinuch will be 1 year before, or it will be 2 years before. But to Rabbi Yochanan, it's problematic. It's kasha. So why is it good for Rav Huna and Rav Nachman to say that according that mid'Rabbanan, it's before 1 year, it's before 2 years? And why is that difficult for Rabbi Yochanan?
In the case of in the case of Rabbi Yochanan, well, he says 12, but we would assume that'd be 13 for a boy. But I'm not sure.
Okay, so you know what we're going to do? The sugya actually, as you see, it's starting to get a little bit difficult. We're not sure exactly what the Gemara means along the way. But what we're going to do is we're going to read the sugya. We're going to read the sugya down here till this part. And we're going to structure it out. This is a lesson in tackling a difficult sugya. So we're going to try to structure it out and try to understand what the Gemara is trying to do and how it's doing it. And then the next time we learn, which will be in a while, because next week is going to be Sukkot. The week after is going to be Chol HaMoed. So we're not going to learn until the third week. So I'm just going to we're going to lay this out, and then we're going to tackle the sugya in earnest when we come back next time. What we have, but this is what we have so far. We have this idea from the Mishnah that Ein Maninotan, right? That children either we don't make them fast or we don't let them fast on Yom Kippur, but we're mechanchin otam. So then we have to define what's the chinuch. We understand chinuch begins between 1 year or 2 years. Then I see Rav Huna. You know what? Let's think about this for a moment before we go on in the Gemara there. So the Mishnah says, "V'chanchin otam lifnei shana v'lifnei shnatayim." So what we understood so far is that 1 year early or 2 years early, 1 year prior or 2 years prior, would be 1 or 2 years prior to them being chayav midioraita. When I see Rav Huna, so he says, "Ben shmonu ben tesh machanchin otam l'sha'ot." So, and this is talking about a girl. So our assumption is that the girl becomes chayav when she's how old?
12.
Well,
12 years in a day, technically. In other words, she has to complete 12 whole years. And then the next day, she's chayavet. So technically, how old is she then? All right, let's just wait. I don't want to get into that. Let's hold on to that for a moment. So Rav Huna says that we start chinuch when she's 8 or 9. The Mishnah said, "Mechanchin lifnei shana v'lifnei shnatayim." So if she has to fast when she's 12, so then when would we think chinuch begins for her?
10 or 11.
When she's 10 or 11. So according to Rav Huna, he says, actually, chinuch begins earlier. The chinuch begins when she's 8 or 9. Meaning, how many years prior to when she's chayevet?
3 or 4.
So 3 or 4 years prior to her actually being chayav d'oraita, we start to do chinuch. And similarly with Rab Nachman and a boy, because he starts at 9 or 10. But then, so Rav Huna says when the girl is 8 or 9, then we withhold food from her for a few hours. But once she's 10 or 11, then she has to finish the fast mid'Rabbanan. So now how do I understand that in light of how do I understand how that would fit into the Mishnah? The Mishnah says,
So,
go ahead.
She becomes chayav de Rabbanan 2 years before she's chayav de Raita.
So
And so therefore the chinuch would start either 1 or 2 years before she's chayavet de Rabbanan.
okay, so when it's if that's true, so then what's the chinuch that the Mishnah is talking about when it says what is the chinuch?
One delays feeding for the two.
That's not what Rav Huna said. What did Rav Huna say the chinuch 1 or 2 years before is? Right, Rav Huna says ben shmona ben tesha mechanchin oto l'sha'ot ben eser ben achadesrei mashlimin mid'Rabbanan. So what's the chinuch according to Rav Huna?
It's really the full fast.
It's really the full fasts. That's what it would seem, and then we're going to have to say the same thing for Rav Nachman vis-a-vis a boy, because he says ben 11 ben 12 mashlimim midrabanan, and then the earlier chinuch, the earlier withholding of food is for chinuch, but maybe that's not the chinuch that the Mishnah is talking about. But there's also a problem with saying what we just said, in the sense that the Mishnah says, "Atinokot ein ma'aninotan b'yom kippurim." So what did we think that meant? Ein ma'aninotan b'yom kippurim.
We thought that meant we don't prevent them from eating.
We thought that meant, according to Rashi, that we don't prevent them from eating. Or as I mentioned, according to the Rambam of the Rif, it means that we don't let them eat. We don't let them not eat. I'm sorry, right? We don't let them not eat. So to begin with, this is all a little bit, right? It's a little bit difficult. Then we had Rabbi Yochanan, who says, Hashlamad Rabbanan Leka. He says there is no such thing as Hashlamad Rabbanan. There is no such thing as a child finishing, that there's any kind of chiyuv to Rabbanan, mishum chinuch, to finish the fast before they come of age. So rather, what's the halacha? Ben Eser ben 11 mechanchino oto l'shaot. The chinuch is that the year or two prior to them being chayav, we feed them later than usual, and then 12, and we're going to leave it as for the moment. We're going to go with the idea that ben 12 is referring to the tzinoket, even though Paul's question was a good question. It's not clear, but let's say, in other words, what Rabbi Yochanan would be saying is, chinuch by definition in this context means that you withhold food from them, by the hour, right? But not for the whole day. And there is no such thing as that making them finish the fast midrabanan. So now on this, the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, and it says, "Atinokot ein ma'aninotan b'yom kippurim, aval mechanchinotan lifnei shana v'lifnei shnatayim." So the Gemara starts off by saying, actually, the Mishnah seems to go better for Rav Huna and Rav Nachman. Why? Bishlama Rav Huna for Rav Nachman, lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim, lifnei shana l'divrehen, lifnei shtayim l'divrehen. That the chinuch, what would the chinuch be in the Mishnah of amachanchinotan lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim? According to Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, the year or two prior to the child becoming of age, what's the din? What's the chinuch?
We mechnachim otan.
That we know, but what specifically, according to Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, do you do 1 or 2 years prior to the child becoming of age?
They fast and finish the Rabbanan.
They fast and they finish midrabanan. So what would the Gemara now be saying? Remember, the Mishnah itself doesn't tell us the nature of the chinuch. It just says, but it doesn't tell us how is the chinuch expressed? What do you do practically? Once we've learned Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, now we have an understanding that there could be 2 levels of chinuch. Okay? So one level of chinuch is you withhold food for them more than usual. And the second level of chinuch is they fast. They fast the whole day. According to both Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, excuse me, according to both Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, there's a mitzvah midrabanan for children to fast, depending on the state of their health, 1 or 2 years prior to them being chayav d'oraita. So now we can say, so this is what the Gemara is pointing out. We have a machoket between Rav Huna and Rav Nachman on the one hand, who say there's such a thing as fasting midrabanan, 1 or 2 years prior to bar bat mitzvah, and we have Rabbi Yochanan who says no, there is no mitzvah midrabanan for children to fast at all, and the only chinuch begins 1 or 2 years prior, and the chinuch is they eat later than usual. So then we say, okay, what did the Mishnah say? All the Mishnah said was atinakot ein maninotam b'yom kippurim on the one hand, but b'chadchinotam lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim. So bishlama Rav Huna v'Rav Nachman lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim. So that part of the Mishnah goes well according to Rav Huna or Rav Nachman, because what will I say that means now? When the Mishnah says lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim, what will it mean? Lifnei shana l'divrehen, lifnei shtayim l'divrehen. That 1 year prior or 2 years prior, that they are going to fast midrabanan, and that's the chinuch. The mitzvah of chinuch would be that they fast midrabanan.
There is a question.
Yeah.
If they are fasting according to Rabbanan,
Yeah.
they have a chiyuv to fast. So if they break the fast, let's say they don't succeed in fasting, they do an avera. Maybe it's not the oraita, but they have an avera. But if it's not according to the Rabbanan, they just they try, or the parents try, or the children try. And if they don't succeed, they don't succeed. Nothing happened.
Okay, so I'm glad you bring it up that way. So I want to point out, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but let me emphasize the point. Children prior to coming of age don't have any mitzvot. Even the Rabbanan, they don't have any mitzvot.
So why don't they say the Rabbanan? It doesn't make sense.
So who is the mitzvah? Who has the mitzvah?
The parents.
The parents. The mitzvah is for the parents, l'chanech. The mitzvah is on the parents to do chinuch. So if the child doesn't complete, let's say, according to the idea that the child has to, according to Rav Huna or Rav Nachman, the child 1 or 2 years prior to becoming bar bat mitzvah has to complete the fast, midrabanan. If they don't complete the fast, so then it would be that would be a pigam in the chinuch of the parents. Right? In other words, the parent would have may have some kind of liability in terms of, but not necessarily a punishment, but it might be held against them if they didn't educate their children in that way. So that's the basic answer to your question, because the chinuch is always the mitzvah for the parent. It's not a mitzvah for the child, l'hitchanech. It's a mitzvah for the parent, l'chanech.
Nevertheless, the parents are forcing the child to fast. And if he can't, if he's unable to do it.
So without getting into questions of parent cruelty to their children, I'm going to leave your question for the moment. In other words, for the moment, we'll just say it's not really, as it were, the responsibility of the child to complete the fast, but it is the responsibility of the parent to teach the child to fast. So when we get deeper into the halacha, we'll see, oh, okay, if the child, let's say if the child is, is a year before their bar bat mitzvah, and they can't complete the fast, okay, so they couldn't complete the fast. But we'll say for the moment, l'chatchila, that's the goal. L'chatchila, the goal is that they should complete the fast. What you're raising is a really important question about how chinuch works. But for the moment, just to get through this part of the sugya, that's all I'm going to say about it for the moment. Just leave it at that. But now again, when we look at the Mishnah doesn't tell us the nature of the chinuch. It just says you're mechanchin lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim. So the Gemara wants to say Bishlamo Rav Huna Rav Nachman lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim. What was that? What is that Mishnah? What does the Mishnah mean when it says that you do chinuch 1 or 2 years prior? So lifnei shana l'divrei lifnei shtayim l'divrei, that they're going to finish the fast 1 or 2 years prior, mid'Rabbanan. Ela, the Rabbi Yochanan kasha, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, this would be a problem. Amar lach Rabbi Yochanan, my shana oshtayim, samuch lepirkan. What does 1 or 2 years here mean? Means 1 or 2 years before their parent, before they reach age, before they reach the age of maturity. So at this point, we really have a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions here. What is samuch lepirkan? In other words, until now, what were we thinking that the Mishnah was talking about? And is samuch lepirkan, does this somehow change our understanding of everything that we've learned until now? Because that's what I see is, in order for Rabbi Yochanan to answer this question, it seems like he has to redefine terms. So the term perek, which generally means like age of maturity, this is the first time we see it in the sugya. We haven't seen it before now. Even Rav Huna and Rav Nachman didn't use that term. But now it seems that it's an important term to understand in order for us to understand how Rabbi Yochanan understands the Mishnah.
Pirkan seems something individual. Some children could get to Pirkan at an age and at another age. It's not defined according to a strict age.
It could, that's possible, although the term is used elsewhere in Shas to mean a specific age. But here, at this point, remember I told you I'm going to leave Rashi on the Mishnah for the time being. At this point, and this is how we're going to end class tonight, let's look at Rashi on the Mishnah. Because Rashi wants to set us up for understanding this part of the sugya. So the Mishnah said, so follow this closely, and we're going to do this again next time. Rashi says right away that the chinuch is that we educate them by hours, lifnei shana, shehi smucha lepirkan, a year before their parent. Now Rashi is going to define the term. Pirkan, their perek, their age of maturity, Avi ben 13 lenekeva, or 14 lezachar. The perek for the girl is when she's 13, and 14, and for the boy it's when he's 14. Shederech tinokot lavi shtei sa'arot b'shteim esrei v'yom echad. It's the way of girls. Tinokot, sometimes tinokot is used as a plural, meaning either boys or girls, by the way, right? Like tinokot shel beit rabban usually actually refers to boys. But here, tinokot, Rashi is using specifically to mean girls. It's the way of girls to have two sarot, meaning that they get their first two pubic hairs when they're 12 and a day. Dahainu b'toch shnat 13. In other words, when they have reached their 13th year. That's why I always emphasize it's not when they're 12, it's when they're 12 and a day, meaning they've completed 12 whole years, and then into the next day, they're in their 13th year. That's her age of maturity for onshin. That is to be chayevet punishment if she did an aveira. Her age for being chayevet onshin is when she is 13 and a day. She's completed 13 years and into the next day. Nimtza shnat arbasrei pirko la'onshin. Ushnat shoshesrei, the 13th year, he shana hasmucha lepirko. This is for the boy. The 13th year, that's the year that is next to the age, no, it's right before the age of maturity. Ushnat shteimasrei, he shana lifnei shana hasmucha lepirko. And then the 12th year, that is the year before the year that is next to the age of maturity. So it's a little confusing, and that's why we're going to do this again next time. But let's finish the next Rashi. Olifnei shtei shanim, right? The Mishnah says olifnei shana, olifnei shnatayim. So what's the 2 years? Rashi says shehi lifnei shtei shanim samuch lepirko. That would be 2 years prior to the year before their age of maturity. Dainu shalosh shanim lifnei pirkan, which would be 3 years before their age of maturity. The Gemara parich, so the Gemara is going to ask, hashta lifnei shtayim, dainu shalosh shanim, amart mechanchim, lifnei shana, dainu shtayim mibaye. In other words, Rashi here, the way he understands this, the Mishnah, and this is as we understand, that's why I waited to do this Rashi, because we understand that there's this idea of perek and samuch leperek, which Rashi understands effectively adds another year to the years that we have assumed. That because the perek here would be it would be the age of maturity for the purposes of being chayav onesh. And that's the definition that we're going to work with. Okay. I'm going to stop here. I want everybody to take time to absorb this. And next time, we'll go back.
Rashi makes things more complicated than the Mishnah, the Gemara itself.
It would seem so, except that we need to understand this Gemara here that we just read. I have to give a pshat to that. What does that mean? And it does inform me that somehow, like whether even if we don't fully understand the Gemara here, I do understand that when the Gemara answers for Rabbi Yochanan and they say Samuch L'Pirkan, that he's changing a basic understanding of the Mishnah, right? Because according to the Gemara, again, this is just the outline. This is without filling in all of the blanks. But what I understand is, according to the Gemara, the Mishnah reads well for Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, but not for Rabbi Yochanan. And so the Gemara answers for Rabbi Yochanan by saying Rabbi Yochanan understands the terms differently. In other words, he's changing some basic definitional understanding of the Mishnah that we have. He's not changing the Mishnah, he's changing the way we understood the Mishnah. So that's where I'm going to stop for now. In any event, so I wish you all a Gemara Chatima Tova, and maybe have Besorot Tovot by the time we meet again. I'll send everybody a reminder before the next year.
All right. Gemar Chatima Tova, Chag Sameach.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Good night.
חתימה טובה, חג שמח, עד כמה שאפשר. כן.
Bye-bye.